The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with whispers and curious glances. Everyone expected a routine hearing, but what unfolded that day would be remembered for a long time. At the center of it all was a black woman who carried herself with quiet strength, standing tall, despite the odds stacked against her. She wasn't just fighting for her case. She was fighting to be heard, to be seen, and to be respected. But sitting across the room was an officer whose words and actions revealed something much darker. Instead of treating her with fairness, he mocked her openly, smirking as though her presence didn't matter. His tone dripped with arrogance, his laughter echoing through the courtroom like a cruel reminder of how deeply prejudice can cut. The room shifted uncomfortably, yet no one spoke up. The woman's eyes, however, told a different story on the surface, but burning with a fire that would not be put out. What the officer didn't realize was that his mockery had just set events into motion that he could never take back. Within seconds, the tables would turn in a way that left the entire courtroom stunned. And in that moment, he would come face to face with the greatest mistake of his career. The woman had not come to court by choice. She had been summoned, reputation questioned in a way that felt less like justice and more like a trap. For months, she had worked tirelessly in her community, standing up for those without a voice. Her courage had earned her respect, but it had also drawn the attention of people who wanted her silenced. Now, sitting in the defendant's chair, she was forced to defend not just her name, but everything she stood for. The officer at the center of it all had a history few in the room knew. To many, he was just another man in uniform, but behind that badge was someone who often let personal bias shape his actions. Those who had crossed paths with him before whispered stories of harsh treatment, of people dismissed or humiliated, but none had ever been bold enough to challenge him in a courtroom. His smirk that day wasn't only about her, it was about the confidence he had, that no one could touch him. But the woman was different. She wasn't intimidated by power or status. She sat still, her hands folded, her gaze steady, waiting. Something about her silence unsettled him, and though he didn't show it, a shadow of unease flickered in his eyes, as if he sensed that his control over this moment was slipping away. The judge entered, and the room fell into silence, but the tension did not ease. The black woman knew that every eye was on her, waiting to see how she would respond to the officer's cruel remarks. She did not flinch, though inside she could feel the weight of years of being underestimated pressing against her. The conflict was no longer just about a legal matter, it had become a test of dignity. A battle between arrogance and resilience. As the hearing began, the officer leaned on his badge and reputation, speaking with the certainty of someone who thought authority alone could win an argument. He painted her as reckless, someone undeserving of trust. His words were sharp, carefully chosen to cast doubt, and some jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Yet as he spoke, cracks began to show. His tone carried too much confidence, almost as if he was trying to convince himself. Meanwhile, whispers circulated through the courtroom. A few people recognized the woman from her work in the community center, where she helped families find housing and mentored young girls. To them, she was not the person being described by the officer. Their silent support filled the room like an unspoken truth, adding another layer to the conflict. But the real turning point was still coming. The officer thought he had control, but he hadn't noticed that others in the room were beginning to see his performance for what it truly was, a mask about to slip. The judge's gavel struck lightly, demanding order, but the unease in the room only deepened. The officer rose again, his voice louder now, as though volume could replace truth. He gestured boldly, his eyes narrowing on the black woman, each word designed to tear her down. For a moment, it seemed like he was winning, holding the room in the palm of his hand. Yet beneath the surface, something was shifting. The woman finally spoke, her tone calm, steady, almost disarming. She did not rush her words. Instead, she chose them carefully, each one a quiet counter to the officer's harshness. She reminded the court of her work, her dedication, and the truth behind why she was really there. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people began connecting the dots, questioning the story that had been so confidently thrown at them. The officer's composure started to falter, his jaw tightened, and sweat formed at his temple. He doubled down, interrupting, raising his voice, trying to silence her. But the more he pushed, the more his own contradictions began to surface. The judge leaned forward, his eyes sharp, as if sensing that something critical was about to break open. The courtroom held its breath. The woman's gaze stayed locked on the officer, unflinching, while he fumbled for control. Every second felt heavier than the last, leading to a moment that would decide not just her fate, but his as well. Just as the tension reached its peak, the judge called for a short recess. The courtroom stirred, people rising from their seats, whispering in hushed tones about what they had just witnessed. The officer quickly stepped aside, pulling out his phone, his face tight with frustration. What he didn't realize was that someone else in the room had been quietly observing everything, and that person was about to change the direction of the case entirely. A young clerk, usually unnoticed in the background, approached the bench. With a file in hand, she had been reviewing records tied to the case, and what she found didn't match the officer's testimony. Her eyes darted toward the woman, then back to the papers, her hands trembling slightly as she debated whether to speak. It was a detail small enough to be overlooked, but powerful enough to unravel everything the officer had claimed. Meanwhile, whispers in the gallery grew louder. People who once sat silent now began exchanging stories about the officer, recalling moments they had seen him act in ways that suddenly seemed connected. The black woman remained still, but her calmness felt different now, less like restraint, more like quiet certainty. The officer caught the shifting atmosphere. His confidence cracked further, his eyes flicking nervously between the judge, the clerk, and the woman. Something was closing in on him, something he hadn't expected, and for the first time, it was clear he no longer controlled the story. When the judge returned to the bench, the courtroom grew silent again, but the silence felt different this time. Charged, expectant, the clerk stepped forward with the file, her voice steady as she explained the inconsistencies she had found. The documents clearly showed that the officer's statements did not align with the official records. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the officer's face drained of color. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of disbelief. The black woman rose slowly, her presence commanding without effort. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth was finally speaking for her. As the judge read over the papers, it became impossible to ignore the pattern of falsehoods the officer had tried to weave. The courtroom shifted, the balance of power turning right before everyone's eyes. Then came the twist no one expected. Before the judge could deliver his ruling, another voice spoke from the gallery, a man who stood and identified himself as a retired officer. He admitted he had seen similar behavior from the same man years earlier, but had been too afraid to speak out at the time. Now, with the evidence exposed, he could no longer stay silent. The room erupted, the officer frozen in place. What had begun as mockery had now spiraled into the unmasking of a hidden pattern. The woman's dignity had not only defended her, had uncovered a truth far larger than anyone imagined. The judge raised his hand for silence. His expression firm yet thoughtful, he reviewed the evidence once more, then addressed the court with clarity. The officer's testimony was dismissed, his credibility shattered in front of everyone. The case against the black woman was dropped immediately, and her name was cleared. Relief spread across her face, though she carried it with quiet grace, never once gloating over the downfall of the man who had mocked her. As the officer was escorted out, the retired officer who had spoken up received a nod of gratitude from the woman. His decision to break his silence had shifted the entire outcome, proving how one voice can change everything. The community members in the gallery left inspired, some even stepping forward to thank her for showing them the power of standing tall with dignity. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Reporters rushed to capture the story, but she kept her words simple. Truth always rises, even when buried under arrogance and lies. It was not just a personal victory. It was a reminder that respect and fairness matter more than power or position. Her story became a lesson for many that no one, no matter their status, is beyond accountability. And sometimes, the calmest voice in the room carries the greatest strength of all.